Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, May 5th meeting of the Finance Committee. As we have been throughout this pandemic, we are meeting virtually, so I'll begin by reading my state-required statement. Pursuant to the Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16th, 2020, the Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the Governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, a roll call attendance of the committee will be taken. Ms. Zemer.
Here.
Mr. Alfred.
Present.
Mr. Sparrow.
Here.
Mr. Maxwell.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Ms. Nersessian.
Here.
Okay, I believe we are all here. So I must say, I love the fact that we get perfect attendance when we have virtual meetings. So, okay, so first up today, just quickly, I wanted to make sure, did everybody check their email before the meeting? I sent out minutes. If people want to, during the meeting, as we're doing some other things, take a look at them. They're not too exhaustive, but you should read them. Then at the end of the meeting, we'll consider approving those minutes so that we can get those released. This is the first set of minutes to come from the town employees who are basically using their now free time due to the closure of town hall to help us get some of these minutes done. So, okay. So everybody got those, correct? Yes, okay, good. I'm seeing general nods of approval. That's good. Okay, so next up, our first real issue for tonight is Mr. Keast, our new facilities manager. So James, you can unmute yourself, and you wanted to talk to us about the software you wanted. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for allowing me to speak tonight. Just want you to know, I'm James Keast. I'm the new facility manager for the town. I'm also a 15-year resident of the town. I've served on the Open Space Preservation Committee for about 13 years, and recently on the Parks and Rec Commission, which I resigned when I joined, the town with the facility manager position. I'm here tonight to request a line transfer of a surplus in my salary line and apply that to a procurement of a computerized maintenance management software system, which I feel is critical to the success of this facility department, critical to the success of the facility department for the town. I think probably the first place to start is to talk about what the surplus is. So firstly, this position was slated to start on January 1st of 2020. I didn't start until March 16th of 2020. And it's that delta in the time of salary that was not, obviously applied to an employee that I would like to apply to the procurement of the software. Excuse me, I have to put on my glasses. The total amount that we're talking about that was in the FY20 budget is $60,975. And the breakdown of that is $47,500 for the salary, $11,875 for indirect costs, $1,000 for equipment, $500 for miscellaneous tools, and then $100 for supplies. And that's how we get at the $60,975. Now, I was trying to get an exact figure of what would be available at the end of the year, and I haven't been able to get that. But I went through and did a little calculation, which I think is probably accurate within a few $100s. So if we take the $60,975 and we subtract my salary from starting on March 16th to now, so that would be 15 pay periods at $1,826 a week. And then there are 2 days in the end of June, the 29th and the 30th, So if we take that 1826 divided by 5 and multiply by 2, we can then get a full look at what the salary I would be paid from March 16th to the end of the year, end of the fiscal year, which is $28,120. I received a computer, a phone, and then of course there's some bills. And this is where and I wouldn't say it's guesswork, but without the actual numbers, I had to estimate. So the computer I estimate is about $600. The phone is about $50 a month in terms of fee. I assume $100 or so to buy the phone. It's a basic phone. And then we spent $275 for me to join a facilities association. And if you add that all up, and subtract it from the $60,000, we have an estimated surplus of $31,855. So are there any questions before I move on to the software with that?
No, go ahead.
No, I have some questions, but we can wait until after we discuss.
Right, I was going to say, go ahead and finish everything, and then we'll have the questions at the end.
Okay, and in terms of the line item transfer, the challenge we have is that the request, the line transfer request, hasn't been officially put into the form that's necessary for that to happen. So I don't think anyone could really vote tonight for that. I'm going to hopefully get the paperwork in order. Work with Sharon to get that taken care of. So at some point, a vote can be taken whether or not to transfer that surplus. And plus, we need to add a budget line. And I talked to Ben briefly about that. So some other line within the facility manager budget that we can transfer the funds to, and then purchase the software from there.
Yeah. Don't worry about those logistics. Just talk about what it's going to cost. We'll take care of logistics.
Okay.
What it does too.
What did you say, Dan?
What it does.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Talk about the software and the cost. Yeah.
So part of the year one employment plan document that I received, and I believe everyone in the towns received, that was laid out for this position was, and I can read from it, says the facility manager will research and identify for use or procurement an electronic work order system to be used for all facility matters, including calls for service, repairs, emergency and planned improvements. This electronic system will be used to monitor call response and resolution to matters. The system should be identified and requested within the first 3 months of hire. So that's one of the actions that I need to take place, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Basically, the tool is a centralized database for all facility-related activities. It includes preventive maintenance tracking, custodial work, repairs, work order requests, capital planning assessments, asset management, vendor management, contract storage, facility condition assessment reports, details related to the budgeting and finance with respect to, again, this is all related to the facilities, and real-time reporting. The advantage is that it removes reliance on an individual's memory for history or future activities, especially when it's related to maintenance and preventative maintenance. It drives consolidation of vendor services, which results in consistency and cost savings. It also drives cost manage proactive activities and reduces expensive reactive activities. So with this tool, you can plan all of the preventive maintenance, have it all scheduled out in a calendar, plan it out throughout the year, plan out the expenses throughout the year, and with proper preventive maintenance and deferred maintenance, we can minimize the emergency expenses that come from not having a good plan in place. The other big aspect of this tool is it provides accurate capital forecasting for capital improvements. It can actually do it in real time. So if we know that a particular roof has a certain age and it's had XYZ repairs, we can extrapolate out when that that roof is going to need to be replaced. And we can do that. So it gets rid of the spreadsheet. When I first joined, it's been 2 months now, I looked at the capital improvement plan, and there were some line items on there for $500,000 or so, or maybe it was $100,000. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but for HVAC replacements at 1750 and some other work at Town Hall. Digging into that, that wasn't, that work isn't necessary. And so I don't know if that threw off the capital improvement plan at all by having those numbers in there that weren't entirely accurate. That would go away with this tool. Another critical part is that, in the current model or the old model, several folks are looking after all of the buildings in town. That oversight is now going to rest with me and this department. And so you're taking several eyes that have been, taking care of these buildings. And these are folks that really isn't their job to do it, but they have been doing it. And then that's all now going to rest on the facilities department. And it's just going to be too much for one person or even two people to handle to keep track without having some sort of centralized computer system to help manage that work. And that's the pitch in terms of why we need it. The process in terms of selecting a particular vendor, I reached out, and this was in conjunction with Chris Mayo, reached out to 5 providers of this type of software. Let me get you the list.
So this is just to cut to the chase here. This is the Dude's software, right?
Well, Dude is my recommendation, but yes. Okay. So we looked at Dude Solutions. We looked at eMaint, which is by Fluke. We looked at Fix, F-I-X-X Solutions, and then another company called FMX. And and actually we also reached out to the folks that do the software for the permitting, People GIS. And they didn't even get back to us. We had an initial call, but they never came back to us. The other folks, the other 4 remaining, 2 stood out and had everything that we need, which were FMX and Dude Solutions. Fixed Solutions and eMaint offered components of what we needed, didn't have the expandability that we would need over time as if we want to roll into the schools or if we want to roll into the DPW to be part of the system as well. In terms of cost, Dude Solutions is the most cost-effective compared to FMX, but they both offer the same level of service. There's pros and cons. I can share a document with you that lists all the pros and cons. Probably don't need to go into that great detail, but the numbers are as such. So the first year configuration fee would be $7,250. There's an asset tagging, so all the physical assets will be tagged and barcoded so that when there's a particular air handler in Town Hall, that's going to be identified and tracked, and we can track the maintenance and the repair of that. And if, say, that particular unit is has more repair needs than, say, it's a sister unit in the cabinet next door, we can then do those analysis and say, you know what, it's time to replace that unit that's costing more to maintain than the other unit. So that service is $11,922. That's a one-time fee. And then there's the annual fee. And this would be something that would go on, obviously, annually, and that's $11,190. That's unlimited user fee. The FMX software actually has a per-user fee. The price that they gave us is for 10 users, but obviously we're going to need more than that. Even the folks that are entering in work orders and service requests would need to have a login, and so that could get very expensive. So the total outlay for year 1 for Dude Solutions, and that includes the setup, the annual fee, is $30,462. The plan would be that the transfer from the salary surplus would cover that cost, and that would carry us all the way over until FY22, when we would need to allocate or budget for the $11,190 for ongoing annual service.
Okay.
That's
So
what I have.
okay, that's good. So I guess I'll open up for questions first. And because we're virtual, just signal me somehow if you'd like to talk. I know Mr. Alfred already said he had something, so I'll let you start.
Thanks, James. It was a good presentation. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So I don't really have an issue. I think, obviously, look, we've invested in you and we've invested in this position. We need to make sure that we're getting, the usage out of it. And certainly if we're going to be tagging every single piece of equipment and really being able to track it, that makes sense. My concern is more on a broader basis for what we're using fiscal year 20 money for. This is now the third or fourth time that I've heard departments, and I think we'll talk about it when we talk about the police, mentioning using some favorability in the 2020 budget to pay for things potentially for 2021. And my concern is not necessarily that I'm against or I'm for or opposed to doing that, but it's that we're in theory being asked to make those decisions without actually knowing what free cash is or could potentially be. And while at the same time we're going to be needing to make decisions on capital set aside for the year, and that's one area where I sort of have seen potentially being able to pull that down a little bit to ensure that we can fund the things that we need to fund, with the idea of potentially making up for it in the fall with free cash. And so if we're making decisions now that will eat into the future free cash, basically what I'm saying is I don't want to make these decisions in the vacuum of not having an idea of what free cash might be looking like. And I know it's very tough, and it's hard enough to ask what free cash is on July 15th, let alone two months before the end of the year. But I would like to propose that we ask Sharon to take a shot at trying to sort of look at that and see if she can take some sort of, and I'm not asking for it's going to be 1.15 million. I'm looking for more of a sort of an idea, because to me the difference is if free cash is looking right now like it could be $2 million, then we're good, right? But if it's looking like it's going to be under $1 million, then we've got to be really careful about what we start sort of pulling down from even that number. And so, I don't know all the nuances of the free cash calculation, but looking at run rate for receipts, looking at what we did last year then versus how things are trending right now with the given environment that we're in, how much money have we received from the different one-time or one-off type of, the pot money, different sort of big inflows or outflows that there may have been. I think before we can start making these decisions, we really need to have a better idea what that is, because that will change my view on whether we want to pull down the capital set aside for the year.
Well, that's really not a question for him. That's a question for us.
No. But I just wanted to frame the whole conversation, and not really. And I guess I don't really have a question for you. I think you basically answered it, and it seems like a fairly minimal cost. The only thing I would say is, does that $30,000 that includes all of the labor that's going to be included with tagging everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That includes. That is.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that is includes everything. That's includes the labor, includes the service, includes the training. So all the folks that want to learn how to use the system, it includes the training as well. So. And
is there any maximum number of tagged items within that, or is it just whatever the time? I mean, have they just said basically whatever because if you're starting to tag air handlers, I mean that seems like you're getting into some some sort of minutia. This isn't just a chair or a desktop.
We want to tag all capital, right? That's the
I understand that, but an air handling unit is definitely a big piece of capital, but there are tons of other things that is it duct over? I don't what is it? Is there different pipes? It's I just want to make sure that that the contract reads that it's all inclusive and that there isn't any sort of limits that may, if we end up having a lot more, because we do have so many buildings in different areas, they come back and say, well, actually, we're running about $5,000 over or 10
Well,
grand.
the answer to that is, do you have a quote from the vendor, James?
Yes, I have formal written quotes. And to answer your question, Dan, the asset tagging fee that they're being charged, which is basically more than the actual annual fee, right?
Yep.
And whatnot, is based off the square footage of the building and the structures.
Okay.
And so that's how they base their cost. But everything is, so the roofs get an asset tag. They're physically not going to, put a sticker on it.
Right.
It will be tagged and tracked. All the physical assets in the buildings. If we want to get to, the electric hand dryer that's in the bathroom, that would get a tag.
Okay.
So these things will get the little QR codes. Any repair technician that we hire, and ultimately my goal is to have, annual contracts, bidded out annual contracts with a lot of our, vendors, and they come in to service. It gets scanned. As soon as they scan it, it pulls up the entire repair history. This belt was replaced on, July 3rd, and so on. All of that information is available. So it's a critical step to making this tool really work for us.
I just wanted to know if there was some sort of liability in that they get halfway through and they say, no, we need, an extra 20,000.
Well, that's why I said, what I would suggest, James, is send us the quote. You ready to
Yeah, I could do that. Yeah, absolutely. I can do that.
Yeah, so that's my only real question for you, because other than that, obviously, it's not a ton of money, but it's a decent amount of money given the current environment. But we have invested in this, and to not do it right, then essentially it's sort of wasting money on having you sitting there and not having the tools that you need to do your job. So
you hit the nail on the head. You literally took the words out of my mouth. I mean, that's exactly correct. I mean, this really is a critical piece to the success of the role, and you've made the investment in me,
right.
This position in the town, and this is.
Well, it sounds like you should also help with the capital planning and all of that as well. So that
absolutely.
Right. And I'll get to
right now is a spreadsheet, right? So
yes, that was one thing I was going to point out, is that the three of us on the capital subcommittee we haven't met in a little while, but when we were meeting to talk about this, right, Ben primarily drove some exploratory work with other towns and what they were using, and the dude's software that he's referring to is stuff that we had discussed in the capital subcommittee as being of potential value. So we're familiar at some level with this stuff and what it can do. Mr. Sproul, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. So, Mr. Keast, it's good to talk to you again. I've had a couple conversations with you, and I appreciate your candor and your prompt responses to some of my questions. I just have two questions at this point, beyond some of the other stuff we've already talked about. The first is that you mentioned that particularly with Dude Solutions, that the tagging is based on square footage. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Does the quote include the schools in that?
No, it does not.
So if we did want to go back and do the schools, it would be another fee down the road. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And the nice thing about the Dude Solutions software is, you're right, about 80% of the communities in Massachusetts use that tool. So if we hire folks or I leave or whatever, I mean, people could jump in here right away, and chances are they're going to have quite the knowledge of this tool. In terms of the specific schools, Dude Solutions, a lot of folks have probably heard of School Dude. That's a module to the tool, to this program. And so for the schools, I just asked briefly the contact that I've been working with, if we wanted to add the schools, it's based off of students. They gave me a number of $10,000 to add the schools. Again, if when we get to that point, we'll get a formal quote. But it's an investment to expand into the schools, but it's not crazy.
Okay. My second question is, so once the tagging takes place and any planning or any work orders and things like that are entered into the system, is it housed on our servers locally, or is it housed by Dude Solutions? So in effect, what I'm asking is, is it our data? Like, if, let's say, hypothetically down the road, we say, you know what, Dude Solutions isn't the right fix for us, we'd like to move over to something else. At least we'd have all the tagging and data available that we could then port over or figure out, you know, what to do with. But at least it would be our data. It wouldn't be owned by Dude. And then if we said we ended the contract and they kept the data. Right.
No, it's our data. We own it. The service is cloud-based. And so, you know, it's stored, and you're probably stretching my limits in terms of IT. You probably know that
we can ask Chris,
but it's not stored on a server in the basement in town hall kind of thing.
Okay.
It is web-based, and it's, you know, but we do own the data. We own the tags. We're paying for them.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, Ben, this is Chris Mayo. Like James said, we own the data, but they house the data. It is cloud-based.
Okay. That's great. All right. Well, thank you very much, James. Thanks for the chiming in there, Chris. And I appreciate what you're doing, and appreciate the presentation. That was really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Nussessian, you got a question?
I do. And thank you for sending over the quote. I think that would be helpful. I actually had two questions. I think I heard you say that 80% of the towns in Massachusetts are using Dude.
Yes, that's correct.
Are there towns that are doing something on their own? And the reason I'm asking that is mainly just because of where we are from an economic standpoint. I'm wondering, I don't disagree that this is needed. I'm just trying to reconcile sort of, where the economy seems to be headed. And so I just have some concerns there. And I'm wondering if there's other options that we have.
We could, I don't know, to answer your first question, I don't know what the towns that don't have a tool in place are doing. I can, conduct that research. I suspect it's, Excel spreadsheets and, Word documents. But I don't know what other towns are using. I did reach out to the towns that are using this tool, surrounding towns, and spoke with several folks, and they're all very happy with it. And it certainly fits their needs. But I have not spoken to a town that is not using any tool.
Okay. And then my other question was just on the tagging, and depending on when it comes in and the resources in town, would there be any way that we could do the tagging ourselves to save the $12,000?
We can. I mean, the challenge is that they come with a team of folks and who have expertise in roofing, have expertise in identifying equipment type and age, condition assessments of that equipment. And these are the physical assets. I mean, we can do that. It would be a huge undertaking of my time, Chris Canny's time, and the other inspectors. Anything is possible, right? To do that, but it would take probably a year to do that assessment that they're going to come in with a team of folks and do within a month.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Ken. Dr. Ken.
Hey, look, I just did that because I was in a meeting with Brad Jackson. So.
Oh, okay. I was wondering why you put that up on today. Thank you. Thanks for presenting this. This was very informative. I think we're paying all this money for your services, so I think it only makes sense for us to go and purchase the software, because I think in the long term, and maybe I'd like you to answer this question, we're going to have savings from a preventive maintenance standpoint. We're going to be putting things up which we haven't been doing, as I'm sure, because we have people who have no clue about buildings, running buildings. We have the police chief in the past managing a building, and well, his expertise is not managing a building. So I foresee this saving us money in the long term. So I think it's worth the short money we're spending. Can you tell me, based on your conversations with the other towns who are using this, did they see a decrease, or maybe they're already using a system, but did they see a decrease in maintenance calls and things breaking in the middle of the night and other things because of this software?
You know, I didn't ask specifically that question, but I did ask the question of how long have they been using the tool, and they've been using it for years.
Okay.
And so I would say, us being new to using this tool, I would be almost 99.9% certain that we're going to see an improvement in terms of repair, emergency repairs, and you know, really, I mean, I'm looking at this from a consolidation standpoint and really doing analysis. I mean, Martel HVAC, we're doing a bunch of work on some units, and I happened to look at an old receipt, and they were saying, okay, yeah, we had to replace a fan motor. And I'm like, well, how old is it? And, you know, I saw some receipts when I first joined, looking through it, and something was replaced. I don't know if it was on that unit or not. That was within a year. Oh. And so, you know, we have no idea what was done in the past. And, you know, now we can make educated decisions. We can keep track of our vendors. I mean, we all want to trust them and all, but you never know. And so I can be certain that we're going to see a decrease in emergency calls and with proper preventative maintenance, reduction in costs in the long run.
Excellent. Okay, that was it, because Ben took a couple of my questions. So,
okay, we're all one big happy family. Michelle, I believe you had a question.
In the beginning, you were talking about what the software does, and one of the things you mentioned with purchase orders. Is this integral with the Munis software?
No, and that's a good question for Chris, whether it can be. But you know, the purchase orders and work orders, one of the key features, and in fact, I've set this up with the help of Chris, of course, was to, if you go onto the town website and you go into the facility department tab, you can submit a work order. So if someone has an issue, it's hot in their office, there's a leak in the roof, or the bathroom sink doesn't shut off. All of these things could be entered into the system as a work order. Right now, it's sort of manually tracked through the town website, something that we initiated. But within this system, it gets tracked, it gets assigned to the particular asset. You go in there, assign it to a vendor. The vendors are actually associated with this. The service call goes out to the vendor. They come in, repair it. They scan the code, make the repair, and it's all contained within the system.
Right, but
go ahead. I know what you're going to say. Go ahead, Michelle.
Michelle, we don't actually have a PO system in town. Did you know that?
no, I did not know that.
Yeah.
How do you operate without a PO system?
That's a question.
Yes. So
I knew that we don't encumber money, which has bothered me from day one, but I didn't know we didn't have a PO system.
yeah, that's because, there's been a lot of hatred of POs. Our town accountant, I don't think, likes POs at all. But anyway, how
do you match things up?
Well, that's what I was going to say. So James, I think the follow-on to Michelle's question is when the work order is generated and the vendor comes out and does the work and it's logged in the system, how does that vendor get paid, right? What is generated to generate the invoice that goes to Munis to get paid?
So we can have the vendor still send an invoice to follow the current process. We can have that information come out of the software as well. And I know Chris Mayo's on because we heard his voice from afar. I don't know if if we could link this to Munis, or not. That could be something we could look at.
Okay, well, there's nothing to link it to if there are no POs. My other question is, I just wanted to confirm that in future years, the yearly cost, the annual cost will be the $11,190.
That's correct.
Okay, so the 7,250 is also a non-reoccurring cost. It's only a first-year cost.
That's the first year cost. Yeah.
Okay, those were my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sparrow. And by the way, for everybody raising their hand, I'm taking you in order. You raise your hand. So I'm seeing everybody. So go ahead, Mr. Sparrow.
Thanks. Quick follow-up, and I think I know the answer to this, but the system will be able to track things like warranties as well, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Each of the assets that are tagged will have the warranty. That's the value of having these folks come out. I think as Suzanne had mentioned, can we do this on our own? They will come out, they'll identify the age of the machine based off of the model number and the serial number. They will then be able to track that, okay, yep, this unit has a 10-year warranty, and all that information will be marked within the software. So that, in fact, if there is an issue and it's within warranty, then it becomes a warranty repair as opposed to calling one of our vendors.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Maxwell.
So just one quick question, James. I'm sorry. When we replace equipment, replace an air handling unit, would you then go and tag that unit, or do we have to bring a vendor back in to do that?
No, we can do that. The tool has the provision to generate the QR tag, and we would do that.
So we wouldn't have an annual tagging activity or cost. It would just be built into maintenance.
Right. So, we would do that on our own once we catch up, right? You think about all the units and physical assets that are in town right now. Once we get to that baseline, we can, and then certainly take care of the tagging beyond that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. I just had a couple of questions myself. Obviously, as I said, on the capital subcommittee, we've talked about the Dude software and things like that. When did you get the quote? That's the real first question.
I have it. I received it on March 25th.
Okay. So the quote was obtained in the time of COVID-19. The reason I'm asking that is because of a couple of things. One is that, given the state the economy is in, right? It's I don't want to say it's an opportunity, but from the town's perspective, right? 6 months ago, when the economy was humming along and businesses had more business than they could handle, prices were a lot higher than they are now because businesses are more competitive. Business is more competitive now at the current state of the economy. So I want to make sure that when we're quoting these things, we're doing it with an understanding, we're getting the best quotes we can get given the current state of affairs. So the other thing I was going to ask was, with regards to the tagging and so forth, and this again plays into the quote, maybe something you want to follow up with the vendor. Are they prepared to do that at that cost? And I wouldn't phrase it this way when I talk to them, but we want to make sure that the cost is covered, even if they have to adapt their methods to the crisis, right? For example, they might sit there and say, we're going to send out a team of 20 people to go asset tag everything, right? But that might be different if they had all the 20 people going into one building and tagging everything, where if they can't be separated or something, where you might now have to have one person in each building or some other condition. So I just want to make sure that, that's why I asked you when the quote was, right? Make sure it was cognizant of the environment we're in now. So, and that we don't have them come in and say, well, now it's going to take us twice as long or cost us twice as much because we have new restrictions to work under.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good question. I'll ask that.
So, but I think that I think that to kind of summarize where I think the committee is on this, I think we didn't bring you in here to not do the job, right? I agree with Mr. Murphy that I think that when we get the assets tagged and when we get all this stuff in, it's going to help us substantially in a number of ways, not only with the capital replacement plan, but also in terms of maintenance, things like that. We'll be able to get into a more of a proactive mode than a reactive mode, which is what we're in now with a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely.
Now, the other question is, can we give them a couple of bucks more and have them tag the water pipes if that means they're not going to break for the next?
That's right.
But any other questions for Mr. Keast? Okay.
I do, and I know it's not on the agenda, so maybe we can pick this up another day, but I did want to talk about 260 Woodland, if possible.
Okay, well, we do you want to talk about it from the context of, okay, yes, you want to give us an update on where that stands? That is something we should know, because that is a topic that is going to come up later today, later in this meeting, so.
Okay. So we, through the help of a consultant, Universal Environmental Consultants, put out to bid the work. You may remember that 3 bids that initially came back that were not in the sealed bid process were in the $111,000 to $116,000 range for the cleanup of that site. And I think, as you said, a sign of the times, there are a lot of folks that want that business. We got 9 sealed bids. 1 was disqualified because it went past the deadline, but the lowest bid came in the $40,000 range, which is great news. They're well qualified, according to our consultant, to do the work. Our consultant actually has worked with them several times, so we're not going to get substandard work. They're approved by the DEP to do the work. So at the town meeting, at the select board meeting last night, there was a vote to use some reserve funds to cover that cost. And I believe it was up to $50,000 to use reserve funds to cover the site cleanup, as opposed to putting it, waiting till town meeting for that to happen. So I'm curious from a practicality standpoint, and again, you're going to have to forgive me for not knowing the process that the town follows with these types of things. My goal is to get this done and cleaned up, because right now with the dumpsters that are sitting on site, we're burning $1,000 a month or so just with them sitting there. So the sooner we can get this cleaned up, the better.
Okay.
That was my point to bring that up.
Yeah. Okay. We'll have to have a conversation about that. I think that we're all in agreement. We need to clean it up, right? There's no question about that.
Right.
I have a couple of problems with that reserve fund request, though. But Mr. Sparrow, you had a question, so I'll let you go first.
Thank you. I know I've heard there's been some of the questions, and I don't know if it's been answered in some of your meetings with the select board about the time frame for when the DEP needs this done. Are they saying like within 90 days? Are they saying we can have a little longer? What are they looking for resolution to this?
So they want it taken care of right away. I did approach them and asked that if we could defer this to our fall town meeting. They were not warm to the idea. I did say, well, it could be a matter of not having any money, and that could result in potential furloughs and layoffs if we had to divert funds. It could be that dire. We just don't know. And they said if it got to that point, let them know. But if it doesn't, then they want that site cleaned up as soon as possible.
And my second question is that there are dumpsters on that site currently now, right?
That's
housing
correct.
some. Okay. And we're paying for those dumpsters every day they're sitting there, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's $1,000.
So, we're paying for it either way. So we need to find resolution for it, so we're not continuing to pay for stuff to sit in a dumpster. And how much is left from the original appropriation was it when, I think it was in the fall? Is there anything left from that?
My understanding is that there is not much left. I don't have the exact figure. I think it's a good question for Sharon.
Okay, and that's paying for the dumpster, do you know?
Yeah, right now, what money is left is paying for the dumpster.
Okay.
The demolition contractor was paid out of that. And of course, the work was halted, but there was some work. And so that was paid from those funds as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Murphy, you had a question.
Yeah, how much are we paying a month for the dumpsters? Or a week or whatever it works out to?
I saw a series of bills, but if you give me a second here, let me take a peek. $1,000 a month. I have a note here from Jeff Ritter. It's $1,000 a month.
Okay, and so we're looking for basically $40,000 to finish the job. Now, so there are a couple of things I wanted to ask about this. So, at this point, why is it up to 50,000 if we have a bid?
Because we wanted to have a buffer, and it would be up to 50. I mean, we have the bid for 40, and that bid will actually might be even lower because we're using the current waste hauler that has the containers on site to do the hauling of the waste. That bid that we received included waste hauling as well. So,
Okay. So, and the other thing is that because the demolition had to be stopped because of this, do we know that when the issue is resolved, that the demolition will complete under the original funding? In other words, like if I hire a contractor to redo my kitchen and they rip off one wall and say, "Oh, there's asbestos in your walls," they stop, and then I call in an asbestos abatement firm to get rid of the asbestos. Then they come in and they finish the kitchen, right? So I'm just saying, when we get rid of the hazardous material, right, they're going to come back and presumably finish the job, or did they? The
job is done. Everything, I don't know if it's back there, but it's everything has been demolished. They're just piles of debris around, as well as some that are in the dumpsters.
Okay. Mr. Alfred, you were.
Yeah. So by
the way, you're the only member of the committee that hasn't figured out how to raise your hand in the meeting. So I'll just point that out for you.
I just raised my hand. I don't want to the whole thing.
Low tech way.
Yeah. So I have my reservations about the reserve fund transfer now because I want to get a better picture of where things are, and so I just want to, before we sort of make a decision. But if we do go the reserve fund transfer route, rather than approve a reserve fund transfer, I would rather just say we will approve up to $50,000 for spending. Send us the bills, and we'll do the reserve fund transfer once the bills come in, rather than actually sort of transfer.
Correct. That was the logistical issue that I had. Right. We can't by law approve a reserve fund transfer like that. Right. It's got to be for a bill, and the bill has to be an unexpected bill, unanticipated, unexpected. Right. So we don't have the ability to approve a reserve fund transfer up to a certain amount. We've got to see the bill and approve the payment of that bill. What to Mr. Alfred's point, James, what we have to do is we would just basically assent to saying yes, we'll be fine with a bill that comes in under 50. But my personal feeling is, if you've got a bid for 40, there's been this tendency lately to say, okay, we need contingency, right? In this situation, you're coming to us with a reserve fund transfer and saying, yeah, well, the bid's 40 and we might need a little extra. Okay, we understand that. But we really want it to be 40, right? That's what the bid was. That's what the contract should be. And that's what it should be. So yes, if it came in a little over, we could talk about that. But I think that would be, the intent would be, you'd have to explain why it came in over the bid price. So.
Okay. No, that's fair enough. And I can get you that exact number.
Right.
We don't need it now. We don't need it now, right? You told us it's about 40, 41. We can, if we wanted to, we could take a formal vote like we did with the schools and say, we authorize them to go incur this expense. We understand it's going to come to us at some point. That I'm fine with that if people want to make that motion.
Well, so I would request that we not take a vote on that tonight, only because I'm. No,
I know. You want to get. We don't have to do it tonight.
That's our only right now, sort of weapon that we have against any potential other unexpected costs, other than luckily having favorability in certain budgets that we could use. I mean, I'm reticent to sort of use that now. Still, more than a month and a half away from the end of the year, when we are in a state of emergency and have potentially unknown costs that could come in. I get the DP that this needs to be taken care of, but I from my understanding, conversations that we've had with the everyone. It doesn't. The DEP wants it taken care of right away, but it's not like there's a safety hazard to the town that would require.
I don't think we're the people to say that, right? But
from conversations we've had.
Let me just put it this way. I'm not disputing what you're saying, but I am saying that if DEP has identified it as something we need to take care of, right? You're right in saying that maybe we don't need to, burn the house down tomorrow to get it done, but at the same time, DEP will start putting more pressure on us to get it done if we don't get it done, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. They could come in. We've dealt with this before years ago, where they come in and they get mad when you're not doing it fast enough, and then they give you an ACO, which is an administrative consent order, and they basically tell you, okay, now we're giving you an order to do it. And then it becomes a problem because then you have mandatory reporting. We're still reporting on Marshall Street, the landfill there, more than a decade after they gave us an ACO because they felt we weren't moving fast enough. So
I just want to look at the whole picture of funding before we.
Yes,
decide.
and I agree. 1 week's not going to make a difference.
And one last bit of information, then I'll let you go because I've been occupying your time. The sealed bid indicated starting work on the 22nd of June. That was anticipation of approval at town meeting on
the 15th.
And then the work starting on the 22nd and ending by July 3rd.
Okay. So there is some time built in there anyway, Dan. So, okay, Mr. Murphy, you had a question?
Well, no, just a comment regarding Dan. I would say we really shouldn't delay doing this. I understand it's good that we have extra time. That's even better. The negative is we're spending money. Plus, it's not like that place is overly secure. I walked by there again tonight, and it's just a tarp over a couple dumpsters. Who's to say a kid's not going to go in there because kids being kids, and the next thing we know, we have asbestos flying over the place. So I would suggest we do it sooner than later. So
I don't want to delay. I just want to make sure that we don't use bullets for this thing that we might need for something very critical, PPE, whatever down the road. So I just want to make sure that we take everything into account when we.
Well, keep in mind that we we're insane to proceed with the work. We don't have to fund it from the reserve fund, right? We can look at the situation when the bill comes, based on what you just said. We're not going to get the bill, right, for a little while. So we have the opportunity to potentially look elsewhere for the money, right? But I agree with Mr. Murphy. We do want to get it done. And, from the point of view of the $1,000 a month, it's like, why bother spending, that much more money when we don't want to. Okay,
over the next week, and we can. Yeah.
Okay. But basically, I think the message you should take, even without a formal vote, is that yes, we want to get the work done. Okay.
Okay. Great.
So, okay, Mr. Sparrow.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that I want I think it's, the DEP is telling us to do it, and it is a health and safety hazard, and I'd rather see it out sooner than later. The other thing is before we do a reserve fund transfer, maybe to Dan's point, maybe let's just, could we have how much is actually in the reserve fund, so we have an idea of what we're looking at. I know we did, I can remember we did something for the, water pumps, and I think it was like 15,000. I forget the exact amount, but just to make sure, to see what what the present what the value is in that account.
Yeah, I'll get an updated balance from Sharon to make sure that before we vote on a formal transfer.
And we do ask the town administrator and the town if they know of any other significant items that may be coming.
Well, what I should start seeing is I know that Sharon's been working on the year-end transfers now that we're, officially we're in our, superpower time for the remainder of the year, of the fiscal year. So with that in mind, I know Sharon has been looking at budgets that might need adjustments and things like that. So I can get the update from her and also get an update on where we are in the reserve fund, and we can deal with, as we go into, late May or June, we'll be dealing with that a lot. So I'll get a read on to where we are. And that ties to your first point earlier, Dan, about, getting a read on what we're looking at in terms of budget, what potential for free cash might be looking like at this point.
Right.
Okay. And keep in mind, we do have $200,000 unallocated free cash, which is really allocated. We encumbered it kind of in back before, but if we really got into trouble, we could probably use a piece of that to cover this and put off the tree part of it till July 1 or something like that. So not a discussion we need to have now, but I'm just saying that there is some flexibility there. So any other questions for Mr. Keast? Okay, then you're free to join us or go enjoy your, but thank you very much.
I'll listen in. This is good information. Lastly, and I apologize, what next steps in terms of the software? Wait to hear back.
Well, I think the key thing on the software is get us the quote.
Yeah.
Right? Get us the quote, and then
transfer.
Yeah, ultimately, right? Ultimately, what we need to make it happen is the paperwork, right?
Okay.
So that would be Sharon can work with you to prepare the paperwork, and I have to talk to her about how we're actually going to exchange that. Usually, she leaves me a pile of papers, but in the year of social distancing, I don't know how we're going to transfer all that. I'm going to have to end up picking it up at town hall or something. So, but that's what has to happen, right? I mean, ultimately, you need the transfer paperwork, and then once we approve the transfer, then you're good to go.
All right. Excellent.
And James, let me know if there's anything I can do to help you out with that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. You've been a great help.
The select board needs to approve the transfer first, and then
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what I meant when I said the transfer paperwork has to come to us. It has to go through the process. Sharon to the select board does. So, okay.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
No. Okay. So let's see. Now I got my screen. I'm all messed up here. I had everything organized before the meeting started. Just give me a second. Okay. So the next thing was an update from the chief on, because I see him on where we are on the pandemic side of things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael Cassidy, Fire Chief and Emergency Management Director. No new financial matters to discuss related to our preparedness or response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Haven't incurred any additional expenses for significant PPE in the last week since I updated you. I can tell you that currently Mr. Keast is exploring some guards that would be installed at counters that would be facing the public, which would be part of our community's reopening plan, so that when the governor allows folks to leave their homes and the stay-at-home advisory is lifted and the non-essential businesses are reopened and people are allowed to come back in and access clerks and other town employees at counters at various town facilities, we want to have some guards in place to be able to protect them from any exhalation and any direct contact. So he's currently exploring some engineered solutions and is getting pricing, but we don't have anything final yet.
Yes, I was trying just to give everybody a think of that. I heard about that. That was so just to give people a rough estimate of where we're talking. James had sent me something. Well, Liz sent it to Liz, and she forwarded to me that 20 of these shields would cost. The shields are a little over $100 each. The total thing with shipping and tax would come out to like $2,700 for 20 of these things. Now, just to give a little context to that, in addition to the town hall part of it, there's also the election part of it, right? Liz was asking about it because she's thinking in advance about the town election and having the election set up with the proper plexiglass, separation and so forth. So, anyway, okay. So Chief Cassidy, continue.
No, that was pretty much it. Just that okay. No new expenses this week, and just we're working with James to try and make sure that our reopening plan for all of our town departments and buildings is something where we're protecting our employees and minimizing the risk of exposure.
Okay, so case-wise, are we steady, stable?
Our new cases continue to increase. I am not ready to declare that we've reached plateau. I would say that we are currently on the tail end of the surge.
Okay.
So Holliston or Massachusetts?
Holliston.
Okay.
Yeah. So with regards to things like PPE and the like, right? Are we? You said in the past we're good. Are we still good, and how long do we think we're going to be good for based on what we're seeing so far?
We're still good, and if the trends that we've seen in some other counties in the Commonwealth progress in this region, then we'll definitely be able to ride it out with our existing inventory and also be well suited into the summer. If for some reason, when we reopen up sectors and if people are not compliant with their use of face coverings and we have a new wave, then we'd have to reevaluate whether we had to do an emergency acquisition of new supplies.
Okay. Ms. Nersessian, you had a question? I'll get to you in a second.
I did, yeah. Thanks for the update, Chief. A couple things on the guards. Does that include, do the shields include the library and also the schools for sort of the fall timeframe?
Well, James can probably answer that, and I'm guessing the answer is no. So.
Yeah, I just want to add some clarification. The guards that you were talking about, Dan, are these sort of tabletop mount guards that would be used at the election booths, at the town meeting booths, at the tables, the reception tables. What Chief Cassidy was talking about in terms of the guards that I'm looking at are more permanent glass metal frames like you'd see in a bank that would be installed at the service counters at the town hall. I'm meeting with Leslie McDonald at the library tomorrow morning to see what we can do about putting those. And so there's going to be, there's that expense that you saw for the plastic shields, which is roughly, $100 to $120 a unit. But these larger, more substantial structures that are going to be permanent that will be going in the town hall and possibly the library are a different expense. But to answer your question, Suzanne, we'll be looking at the library. We'll be obviously looking at the town hall and also looking at Parks and Rec. I'm not involved with the schools. Okay, but I'm presuming that I'm going to use the partitions that you're looking at are much more than $100 each. Yeah, I reached out to 6 vendors for the town hall, only received 1 quote, so I have no idea how this compares, but it was $17,000. And that was for a metal frame opening divided into 3 sections across the counter. So on the left and right side, there would be a piece of glass that's 1/4 inch thick, laminated safety glass, with an opening at the bottom, roughly, you can see my hands about, 6 inches or so, then the glass. And then at the very top is opened up about 6 inches. And in the center section would be from the countertop up to the top of the frame. And those would be installed on the 6 service windows there at Town Hall. Okay. More information on that when I have it. Okay, fantastic. And then, Chief, the one question on the PPE that I was wondering is, in terms of what you had ordered and what's come in, will that accommodate people who will be encountering the public going back to work, or will that need to be a new shipment?
The PPE that I have is designed for people who would be interacting with potential patients or people who are symptomatic. It would not be designed for the clerical and office staff at some of the offices that we've been discussing that are currently not accessible to the public. So if we needed that sort of level of PPE, that would be an additional expense. Okay. And who in town, is that Board of Health that would coordinate that, or who would be sort of looking into that? Because I know many offices are looking into providing, or many businesses are looking to providing their employees, masks, et cetera. So is that individual departments, or is that centralized in town? No, it's centralized, and Board of Health and I have been providing existing departments with PPE for their personnel. So building department for their inspectors who are going out in the field, water department for their people who are working in the office, treasurer's department for folks that are working in their office. They've all been equipped with a level of PPE by either the Board of Health or myself. But again, in terms of long-term planning and in terms of a supply for 3, 4, 6 months, depending on what the new normal looks like, That would need to be a purchase, but I can tell you that the Board of Health has received 2 separate allocations from the state, and they do not yet have a plan for how all of that money is going to be spent. A lot of it will be eaten up by the nursing consultant that they're using to do the contact tracing and the surveillance, and that's an hourly payment that they're paying the nursing consultant. But other than that, the expectation is that there would be some money that would be able to purchase some lower level PPE.
Okay, thank you. Can that may be something that we at least want to understand and know about?
Yeah.
Sort of how the Board of Health is approaching that and what the cost might be for, maybe it's when we get our budgets, because obviously it wouldn't start until almost the end of the month. So maybe it's more into next year, but that might be something we want to understand.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay.
Of course.
Mr. Murphy, you had a question?
More of a comment based on piggyback what Sue and the chief was mentioning, just how are we going to pay for these borders or whatever, walls or windows that we're going to do? Is this going to be something we can get reimbursed from either the feds or the state?
State does not have any funding available aside from what has been earmarked for boards of health, and that would be geared towards PPE and nursing services. State funds would not be able to be used for these guards at the counters. It's an excellent question as to where that money would come from, and once we have some hard figures, we can dialogue about where that money might be able to come from.
Yeah, well, I'll just make the comment. We'll discuss this in the future, but when we think about capital expenses, right? And taking some money out of the capital fund, not the capital fund, but the funding we do for the capital, right? We might have a lot of capital requests associated with COVIDizing, town facilities. So, something to keep in mind.
Is that a word? COVIDizing?
I just invented it.
Okay.
So if somebody uses it in the future, you can claim you heard it here first. So,
and as to whether or not it would be an eligible expense under the Stafford Act, I can check with my contacts at the state, but based on my previous federal reimbursements, I'm not expecting that those shields would be eligible under a Category B emergency protective measures. That's more of a I think it's a Category E infrastructure, but I don't believe that that's part of this federal declaration.
Okay. Sue, you had a question?
Yeah, just to follow on, Chief, do you know of whether towns or Governor Baker has talked about sort of what measures that will be suggested, just to get an idea of what may be coming through, or what we may be thinking about to COVIDize?
Sure. That I believe you're supposed to say COVIDize trademark. That the minute should have the notation. So they do have an advisory board that's been meeting very diligently in the last week. I know I was on a conference call on Sunday, and one of the members of that advisory board had been meeting for 6 hours that day, and they're looking at all different sectors of the Commonwealth. And I was on a separate conference call today with the Lieutenant Governor, and several officials were saying, you've got to provide more guidance to the local communities. And so that is an area that they will be rolling out advice on or before the 18th of May. But they don't have anything specific that they've offered yet, because they're still hearing from subject matter experts. So, I know, for example, the Golf Association has come in to talk about they'd really like the golf courses to be reopened. So as they're hearing from certain sectors, such as local municipalities, they're getting an earful, and they are getting a better understanding of what workflow looks like and what the concerns are of both employers as well as employees. So this is an evolving plan that's being developed first at the state level, and then will be pushed down to the locals to implement without any funding.
Yeah, and I'll just point out that just to give people some background here, right? I was listening to something this morning where they were saying that if you look at the most scenarios being discussed for how you can open in a COVIDized way, right? That you're looking at 30% or so occupancy relative to what you had before, right? So the point that was being made in the thing I was listening to was 2/3 of people will still be working from home unless the situation changes, right? A vaccine or something to change it, right? Even when these places reopen, you're still going to have 2/3 of people working from home because office capacity is going to be running at about 30% of what, I shouldn't say that, occupancy will be 30% of rated occupancy, right? So I think there is going to be a challenge regardless of how the reopening proceeds, not just with making offices safe, but with a lot of offices will have to adapt more permanently to having substantial work at home. And this discussion was in the context of things like shared office spaces and WeWork and places like that, where they said all that's going to vaporize from the point of view of, you're not going to have people going in and sharing one monitor and keyboard now, that kind of thing. So I think there's it's a lot more than just saying, okay, you can start opening your doors again, right? There's going to be a lot of discussion, I think, about the new way to work, so to speak, until this issue is somehow brought under control. So, okay. So thank you very much, Chief. And obviously, if there are any, anything we can do to help, as we've said before, right? From the financial side, certainly keep us posted, and we'll do our best to obviously make sure we support our public health efforts here.
Absolutely, and we've got great lines of communication. I certainly know how to access all of you, and I try to make myself available on a weekly basis to you.
Yes, well, you accessed us all last week when you sent us the thing about requiring masks, right? So,
as long as you had opted in, I was able to access you. Yes.
Yes.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
I just wanted to say something because I was listening in off and on last night to the select board meeting, and when you were discussing the budget, I just wanted to say that we really do, all of us. I think I hate to speak for all of us, but the zero budget, we all feel horrible about it. I think I can universally say that it's not something we want to do. It's something, and we hope that it doesn't come to that. And I just want to say that it's not something we're doing because we want to do it. We're anticipating and we're planning for something we hope doesn't happen. And I just wanted to say that.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Having been through this many cycles with the financial ups and downs of the community over the last 20 years as chief, I recognize the difficult responsibility that you as a committee have. I know when you make guidelines, they're not done in a vacuum, and they're done for the best interest of the community. And I certainly know that your request for departments to create a new version of their budget was not done lightly, and we'll work with you as we always have in whatever way we can.
Yeah, and we appreciate, at least I personally appreciate you coming up with a budget. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay. So so I guess we're good with you. I know, Chief, you'll probably hang around because you like to. Our meetings are such a draw for you, but you're welcome to go if you need to. Okay. The next thing, really the last two articles on two issues on our agenda, we're discussing FY21. And to that end, I wanted to give everybody an update. I did speak with Pooja last week, and obviously most of us were on the select board meeting for at least part of it when Carolyn Dykema gave her update. We can talk about what we think that means for us, but Carolyn, I had talked to Pooja, which obviously represents more the Senate side because she's, Karen Spilka's chief of staff, basically. But she confirmed pretty much everything Carolyn reiterated yesterday, that the state right now, the process for the state is there's this whole sequence of events. There's basically federal package, how that rolls to states. States can determine how that rolls to us. So from the point of view of when we're going to see budget action from the state side, well, they're not going to really start anything for at least a couple of weeks. According to Pooja, they had a conversation with Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey like 2 weeks ago to ask them about what the timeline was for legislation dealing with municipalities and governments in terms of stimulus from the feds. And their answer seemed to be, she obviously, Pooja didn't give me any firm commitments, right? So just make that clear. But the sense that she had was that they were giving the Senate the sense that it was going to be a matter of weeks, not months, that the Senate was going to take up. And obviously, if you've been following the news, they're already starting to discuss it. But it also seems like there are a very large number of political obstacles in this next bill, not only because they're spending so much money already, but because, as you know, the current administration has different feelings about whether the money should go to the states and municipalities. The Senate Majority Leader has basically advocated bankrupting municipal governments as a way to deal with this. So this is not anything new, but I just want to point that out because what it looks like from our perspective is that in the best case, we see something from the federal government in 2 to 3 weeks, which puts us near the end of May. Okay, mid to late May, let's say. At which point the Senate, not the Senate, the state would then be talking about what that meant for local aid. Pooja did reiterate that she's heard from a lot of communities, not just me and others, that everybody's looking for some kind of planning from the state. Okay, are you going to whack local aid? Give us a ballpark, that kind of thing. I expect we'll have that number probably in June. Not because they'll have a budget, but because the outcome of the federal package will probably be known. And that will then translate into them giving us some guidance based on what the feds do. If the feds come along and say, we're not passing another stimulus bill, then I think it'll take no time at all for the state to turn around to us and say, expect to see 10 to 20% local aid cuts, right? If the feds pass a stimulus bill in the next 3 weeks and they say, okay, we're going to funnel all this money, I think it'll take about a week or so for the state to digest that. And then they'll come back and say, okay, based on the money we think we're going to, what the bill says we're going to get, expect local aid to do this. So I think realistically, we're going to move forward with a model that is 10 to 15% in local aid represented cut, which is what a lot of communities have. Foxborough in the last week assumed 14%. Other communities nearby have been assuming similar types of drop in local aid. And that's what we're doing, right? But I wanted to give you a sense of the timeline because, of course, right now our town meeting is sitting at June 15th. And there are two questions I want to ask, okay? One is, what is the feeling about moving forward with town meeting if we do not have the guidance from the state at that point? In other words, let's say we get to close to June 15th, and we are somehow able, through some mechanism, to have town meeting on June 15th, but we don't have a clue from the state on local aid. Would the committee like to proceed with the budget we're working on now that says, okay, we're going to assume a 10% cut, and we'll go from there, and we'll pass that with the understanding that, hey, if something happens at the federal level and the state comes along and doesn't cut us that hard, we can deal with things in October? Or do we want to say to the select board, push it out to July, do a 1/12 budget for the month of July, and we go from there? I just want to get consensus. The select board kind of Mr. Cronin asked me to, see what our feeling was on that. I told him what my opinion was, but I want to get the opinion of the membership.
Well, that's important because I did want to first say that this is ultimately a decision for the select board.
Correct. Dan, Dan, you lost your audio. There you go. I was going to say, unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay. Something. So I don't want to infringe on their statutory authority, but
exactly.
I think it would be very difficult to have a town meeting if we didn't have the numbers. I don't know how you do anything without sort of, having one of the larger inputs and the biggest input that we know is going to fluctuate and could fluctuate significantly.
Well, as I said, I mean, I'm not disagreeing, but I'll play devil's advocate and say, well, yeah, but we can assume we have a 10% number. We can put together a budget and say we go with that, and then when we get the final number, we adjust in October whether it's up or down.
Well, but if you did that, I would want to be hyper conservative and go with 20% or something. I mean, obviously depending on where things are, I don't know how you go in with a sort of a middle of the road 10% cut when I think it's going to be more than that, barring some significant federal aid. And keep in mind, generally speaking, big federal aid packages don't trickle down to Holliston in significant amounts. It has not seemed to.
Well, yeah, that's true. But we did have the ARA last time.
So. I know there's some. I know there's definitely been some, but
yeah, it's not going to be a messy. That's true. Yeah. So, Mr. Sparrow, you had a question?
Well, I just wanted to. One of the things Carolyn was talking about was scenario planning, and I reached out to Vin about trying to put together some scenarios and trying to think about what is a worst case scenario for where we're at to sort of think about this. I mean, I was thinking, and certainly there could be other inputs, but if we look at, if we assume, say, no growth in the assessment, I'm talking worst case, not to say that this is going to happen. If you assume no growth, you assume a 20% cut in local aid. I mean, if they were saying a $6 billion shortfall, that was the high end by the economists. That's close to 20% of the state budget. And then you assume, I said, double the local receipts decline from the previous recession. You could kind of get to a number. I mean, I don't have that number in front of me, but we could probably provide, Vin and I were going to put some stuff together, and we could probably put something together that says, look, here is a worst case. Here's some other cases. Like if we do get federal money, if there is some growth, we could put together a couple different kinds of scenarios, and I'll send over a tool so people can create their own too.
What do you mean no growth? No new growth, you mean?
No new growth. So basically just a 2.5% increase of the assessment.
Yeah, well,
I don't think that's a realistic. I mean,
that's
I'm talking the worst case.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that we already have to remember the new growth reflects the prior year's new growth. So we already have the growth that occurred through March in this fiscal
year. We could just do it in FY19 if you want. I mean, we could, that's sort of the point of
No, but that's what I'm saying. The new growth that would factor into FY21 would be the new growth that's certified for FY20, which already is, we've already got a number that's a baseline that's probably not going to go, we could go to Kathy and say,
sure,
where are we looking? And I would be hard pressed to think it's going to be less than the 325 that we have in there. Probably going to be close.
But what I'm trying to do is the point I'm trying to make here is that it just from a scenario planning standpoint is to think about it what would be the worst possible case. We would see no growth in the assessment. We would see a substantial cut to local receipts and a substantial cut from the state. What would that look like for the budget? I mean, I'm not saying that all of these things are going to happen. They probably won't. But the idea is to try to sort of look at things as sort of what could be the lowest possible denominator, and then come up with some other ideas. What if we get some federal aid? What if we don't? We could play around with it to sort of give ourselves, I mean, I'm making it up, but maybe we look at those worst case scenario and the budget hole isn't 10 million, it's, $1.5 million. And it's hey, if we play with these levers, we might be able to look, I know. I know it's
going to be more than $1.5 million in the worst case. That I can tell you.
You'd be surprised, but but I know, I hear what you're saying, but the thing is that I think we want to look at those things, and I think then that way we could build something from there. We could say all right, well, here's the worst case, and we could play with some levers to sort of see, and then it's not ideal, and probably the better choice would be to push things out for 1 month at a time. But at least that way we could have sort of a starting point to sort of look at some of these numbers to sort of see what levers do we need to pull? Do we need to, do we need to do something with capital? Do we need something with OPEB? I'm not saying we do anything. I'm just saying what levers do we need to pull and based on the numbers that we're seeing. So I want to work with Vin to try to put something together that we can talk about next week.
Okay. Yeah, and just as everybody knows, right, we have the spreadsheet. You can play with whatever parameters you want in there to see.
Yes, but I'm trying to make it such that you can.
Yes, you guys have to do your work, but I'm saying that anybody who wants to can play with the spreadsheet and try doing their own worst case scenarios.
Well, I'm also trying to. Because I did build the spreadsheet, I'm trying to make it a little simpler, so that way, if you want to do a quick a quick and dirty. If I just pull this number out, what does it look like? You know, because I realize there's a lot of things in that number.
My job a lot easier a month ago when I was doing the 10% scenario.
Yeah, I know. I realize that now, but I'll have something, and we'll be able to put something together that we can look at, and given this is Zoom, I can even put it on the screen so you could see how it works and stuff like that. So
thanks, Ben and Ben. I think that sounds great. I think scenario planning is the right answer. Okay. Not saying that we should decide what to do about town meeting. I just think it's a right answer for right now to start taking a look at that.
So the opinion that I'm looking for is, would we prefer to do everything in our power to hold a town meeting on June 15th, right? Or do we say we want to, we want to, if necessary, if we don't have the information we need, that we should recommend to the select board that they push out another month, let's say.
I think we should do everything we can to have a town meeting and do everything we can, as I said last week, and talked about pretty significantly. However, I think that we need to have the information before we can really go there. I don't want to start scenario because we would need to have another town meeting. I mean, it just gets to be very, very complicated. So I think if you don't have the actual number, we should scenario plan now, absolutely, and sort of be ready to go at the minute they drop in some sort of numbers, and kind of everyone should be able to be looking at these and know where at least they view the levers that they want to pull, so we can vote pretty quickly and kind of get everything
right.
Which is what I view the scenario planning is sort of allowing us to do, is showing us what each case looks like, and then we can either talk about it, what we want to do already before, if the different scenarios come out, or we can just sort of talk about what the bottom line is, and everyone can kind of take that in and think about it, and then once we have the final number, make their own sort of suggestions based upon their views of the scenario planning. But I just, if we don't really know the number, I mean, it strikes me as fraught with fraud, as my grandmother would say, to sort of tempt fate by trying to sort of thread the needle without having the thread or the needle.
Okay. Hey, Mr. Sproul, you wanted to comment again? I want to get the comment of the rest of the membership, by the way, so the two of you have to stop monopolizing everything. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I'm just going to say it real quick. I just think that I'd like to see, like to Dan's point, I'd like to have more information if things stay the way they are, kind of ambiguous, and we don't have numbers from at least the state, it doesn't make sense to go forward, because I think we need a little more solidity in some of these numbers before we can safely and effectively go to town meeting, because then we're just going to have to redo as much as possible, a lot of stuff. So,
well, let me be clear about one thing though, right? If we wait till we get final numbers from the state, which by the way, we don't do on an average year, right? That'll be a lot
final. Right. Okay. I'm not saying final, but
just
I'm
to be clear.
something.
So you're saying if they came along and said, hey, we're doing on the budget, but we're building a budget, not a 15% local aid cut.
Right. If things stay the way they are and they're still kind of up in the air, it doesn't make sense to go forward. That's my opinion, is that we need to have some more solid information to be able to go forward. Otherwise, we're flying blind, and I don't think that's the right way to go.
Let's hear from the others. So, Suzanne?
Michelle was up before I was, but I'll go after her.
Okay. Go ahead, Michelle.
I was going to say, we've gone to town meeting without having cherry sheet numbers.
Yep.
But we've never had so much uncertainty before going to town meeting. So I think there's a difference between not having exact numbers and not having no numbers.
Well,
I didn't say exact numbers.
Right. No, I'm saying.
I'm just saying you may not even have a cherry sheet. They may just, remember years ago, they gave us where they would tell us, like in February, they'd say, okay, we're working on the budget, but we're going to assume that you're going to see this for local aid, right? That's probably all we're going to get in the short, in the intermediate term.
Right. But to me, another concern is, how are we going to meet safely to have town meeting if you can't have more than 10 people in a room?
Well, that's the second part of the equation, right? To me, they're two separate issues, right? There is a discussion going on at the state level right now about how do you hold open town meetings in this environment, right?
Right. Even if you can have a quorum of 10 people, you don't want to have a town meeting that is only, you don't want to say,
by the way,
you have to leave.
Right. And by the way, that the quorum thing doesn't buy us anything, because the reality is I personally feel that if it's a town meeting where you say the first 10 people come in and everybody else gets turned away, that's not a town meeting.
That's us in the select board.
Yeah, that's true. We do. Well, we'd have a 7-3 majority. No, but although Ben's defecting, right? If it's after June 15th, if they delay it anymore, then Ben's defecting. But but yes, but just to that particular point, I'll say that was something I did, as part of my conversation with Pooja. I said, is the state looking at not just passing laws that say, okay, you can defer town meeting, but saying we have to revisit the way town meeting, give more flexibility to town meeting to allow it to be held in a way that meets the distancing requirement. I mean, one of the example I gave her was when we talked last week, we said you can have it outdoors, but the problem is you have to have it outdoors on a nice day, let's say. And right now you can't have a meeting where you say it's going to be Monday or a rain date's Tuesday or Wednesday, right? You've got to say it's this date, a time certain, right? So there's simple logistical things the state could adjust to the law to say you could have it outdoors with appropriate separation, and you post it this way and say, here are the alternative days if the weather doesn't cooperate or something like that, right? So she said there is that discussion going on. We have to see what they do. Everybody seems to be fixated on, can you have a virtual town meeting? But, there's a lot, and I had this discussion earlier tonight with some other people. There's a big continuum between an in-person, everybody in the same room town meeting and a totally remote town meeting, right? There all the things we discussed last week about various degrees of, people in different rooms. Do you have video monitors? Do you have, outdoors? So the problem is that none of that is currently allowed, right? So that part still has to be dealt with regardless of what the state does on the budget, right? But the main point is, okay, so there are two things to consider. If we could have a town meeting, would we want to have it? And it seems to be like, okay, we're saying it doesn't make sense to move forward with one if we don't have a clue where the state's going, right? Okay, so anyway, Mr. Murphy, actually, Sue, you were.
Wait, can I just say something? When we voted on sewers, we had town meeting in the gym and in the cafeteria.
That was exactly what somebody said when I was talking tonight, right?
We had it, and we had counters in the cafeteria too. So we did have it in two. I mean, it wasn't because of social distancing. It was because there were so many people.
Right. But the difference there was if you wanted to talk, you could come into the room and walk up to the podium and talk and things like that. And
right.
I think that's the logistical part of, can you have somebody debating from another room or things like that? I mean, we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but yes, I agree with you. There should be means to deal with this, right? So,
yeah.
Okay, Sue?
Am I remembering correctly that if we extend it, that we have to spend basically the budget that we have currently?
Yes.
Right, we can't reduce it.
The law currently requires, now it depends on when we delayed it, right? We could delay it to June 30th, right? And then we're okay, right? If we delay it a month into July, let's say, then we start the fiscal year, we'd have to put together an interim budget. Now, that's another topic. We will talk about that in a minute, about the interim budget. So don't go down the rat hole of the interim budget.
Just in terms of, I guess
yes, the requirement for that is it's got to be funded at least 1/12. Yes.
So I agree with Dan. I agree we should scenario plan. I also agree with Dan that we should have information. But I don't think if we have to hold with the current budget and we can't reduce costs, then I don't think we should go out for more than 1 month, because I think that I have significant concerns about what I'm hearing, and where the economy is headed and what it's meaning and all of that. And so I think the longer that we have to stick with a FY20 budget, I think that really constrains us. And I think we may have to be able to sort of act in other, have the ability to reduce costs if we need to.
Okay.
So
okay,
I would say not going out,
okay,
a month, more than a month, honestly.
Okay. Mr. Murphy?
I would agree with Sue. Let's be hesitant to go out more than a month, but at the same time, I think we need to wait until we get everything. There's you haven't mentioned, but there's a bill that I think passed the Senate, and I don't know if it's out, but it's regarding how they can hold town meeting. And it's basically, they said they can lower the select board can lower the quorum So instead of a 99 or 100, they can go down to 10%. So 10. So yeah, as you pointed out, there's all our board and their board, and then we're done. But I would be hesitant to go further, but at the same time, I think we need to have people go there. And I don't think it's the party of 10 who can vote for the town. I think we were open
Absolutely.
party. And so until we can get this around what's going on social distancing, and the state has an idea of how we can meet, where we can meet, and fix it. Because Jay mentioned the town council, he's on some sort of commission to do it, and said it's fine out here for the virtual meetings, but you go out into the western part of the state, you're not going to have anybody with technology, so that's not going to happen. So we think,
yeah, but my answer to that, just to interject something, right? My answer to that would be, so what, right? Do you pass a law that says nobody can take advantage of technology just because somebody in the state doesn't have it? I mean, that's like, if you bring some gum to class, you got to bring gum for everybody. I mean, seriously, are we in kindergarten? Okay. So.
That sounds good. So yeah, my opinion is we should hold off, but we should do scenario planning, but I don't think we're ready at this point to do a formal meeting come June. I don't see the state actually being in a position to actually have a meeting with many people. I think we might go up to 50, but not much more than that. So
that's just to be clear, that's why I said there are two parts to what I was asking. Right? Part one is you got to solve the how do you hold a town meeting problem. Part two is even if you solve that problem, do you have a town meeting in June 15th if you don't have the budget numbers from the state? I was asking the second question because I said, look, we have no idea what's going to be possible in 1 month, right? Obviously, even if we had numbers from the state and we can't meet in town meeting safely or whatever, they haven't given us the latitude, that's a different question. Then we say, okay, now we've got a budget. We have to figure out how we get it to the voters, how to get to the residents.
I would say no, we shouldn't because it's too far of a distance between here and October. So whatever we do now, if we wait and said, okay, we're going to get the numbers in, let's say, August, well, that's still some months, and you got all the schools, you got everybody going, and
right.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair. So I think we really need to hold off finalizing anything. But then if we get into July and they still don't have a number, well, then we got to have a different choice. But at this point, I say we hold off producing.
So we'll talk about that in a minute, Vin, about what happens if it goes into July. But Ben, go ahead.
So, I mean, I'm not sure when the right time to talk about this, but, my question is about if we did go with a route with a 1/12 budget, and this might be, I'm putting the cart before the horse here, is the 1/12 budget for all budgets within the omnibus, or is it for the entire omnibus? Like, for example, if we say, I'm making this up, I don't know, like if the schools could, take less in the summers because there's no, because there's less programming and there's more money that's needed for, say, prepaying benefits. I don't know, but I'm just saying I guess that was one of the things about the 1/12 budget. Is it for all the departments, or is it just for the entire number?
It is, you can, just to be clear about what the law says, okay? It says you have to fund every department at no less than 1/12 of what it received in FY20, right? I objected to that provision for exactly the reasons you're pointing out. I said some budgets don't need to be 1/12. We have the ability to go up and not down. And to be completely blunt about it, I think that the intent of the state was, we don't want people being fired. So we're going to force you to fund 1/12. So that means you have to fund all your staff at what they got paid last year, right? Now, that to me is really bad. I mean, they could have said, you must retain staff and let us deal with that, right? Why the 1/12 thing is overly constraining for exactly the reason you described. So the schools, if they did, let's say they did hypothetically come to us and say, hey, July and August, we don't have anything to do, or we have, 10% of our run rate or some fraction of our usual monthly run rate, right? We don't have the ability to say, we have to, now, do they have to spend it? Of course they don't have to spend it, right? But it is kind of ridiculous to have to say, okay, don't spend more than this, but we got to give you this because the law says we have to give you this much, right? And so that's why I said, like, the second part of this is, if we do push into July, part of the discussion that was being had, and I personally, as an individual, not representing us, said I did not agree with this approach. But one approach that was broached was, do we, rather than having to do a month-to-month budget, why don't we just pass a 6-month budget? It gets us to October. And I said I object to that strongly, partly for the reason Vin just said, right? If that was to, well, this way you don't have to come in every month and do a budget. And I sit there and say we should have to do that because the goal of this whole exercise should be to have a town meeting and have a real budget. So you shouldn't be approaching it of, okay, it should really be an incremental thing where you say we're going to do 1 month at a time, and we're going to assess each month, because the goal is not to go through a fiscal year without the town's voice being heard. So anyway, Mr. Alfred.
Yeah. So I just want to say, first of all, that, you know, a lot of talk, I think that Vin and Sue were talking about, you know, concerns about more than just 1 month at a time, because the, you know, concerned about actually needing to do cuts and whatnot. And I personally have not seen anything that makes me feel like we're going to actually need to cut the budget from last year, because I do think that right now the deficit that we'll be in, and even with the sort of the surplus that we want to sort of keep to fund unexpected costs, should allow us to use a prudent amount of stabilization to keep us at least flat. Could things change? Absolutely. I just haven't seen anything right yet that you know makes me think that, you know, I think to get there you start needing to talk. I think that
depends on your willingness for how much you're willing to pull out of stabilization. I don't think.
Well, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, it was like $750,000 to sort of, you know, I still think we can get to flat with some other, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So a reason, what I consider reasonable, I thought we sort of all sort of seemed like we definitely didn't want to spend more than $1 million out of stabilization, because again, just for everyone listening, you know, if we spend it from stabilization this year and things, and you basically have to assume that you're going to need to spend at least that much, if not some amount, you know, from stabilization next year, and because state aid does not just rebound, you know, immediately, yep. Nor do people go out and just, you know, start spending again, and you know, the economy doesn't just pick right back up. So,
well, I think that's where I'm wondering, Dan, is are the current needs of the town going to be the same in terms of what we're currently covering, given the shifting economy and where that's headed? And I don't know the answer to that question. I just don't know. I don't want to be stuck in we have to keep it consistent if things are shifting, and that's where I worry if we continue just.
Like we may not need as many clerks in during the. Well, I mean, look, that's really not our purview, I guess you could say. So I just want to be careful that we're not. I mean, that's really an executive sort of decision.
Yep, I'm not saying any that's where it's headed. I'm just saying I worry that if we're stuck, you can't make changes if you have to keep things consistent. And I think that at some point that flexibility, the town will need the flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like the consensus is that if we don't have a clue from the state yet, that we shouldn't proceed with town meeting on the 15th of June. Everybody's nodding in agreement, and Ben just sat down, so he didn't hear what I said. So we can make up something and he'll nod. So yeah, just nod, Vin. No, yeah. So no, I was just saying. So the consensus seems to be that if we don't have any kind of inkling about where the state's headed, that we should not move forward with a town meeting on the 15th.
Yeah, that would be my thinking.
Okay. Just wanted to.
Should we take a vote, or is it just sufficient to?
We can take a vote, but I don't think it's necessary. I can just convey that this was the sentiment that was expressed by the committee. So, okay. With regards to that, okay, so our last topic was the warrant. I believe you all got a copy, but I will make the comment, because before we get too far down here, the copy that was sent out, did anybody look at it? It was sent out on Friday by Jeff. Okay.
Yep.
Was it just me, or did you see any changes whatsoever? Anything come off the warrant from last time?
I did not, and it was going to be a question. I didn't understand what had been done. So
yes. Okay. I looked at it and I said, okay, we'll discuss it on Tuesday, but I didn't see any less money on here.
Right.
So, and not only that, but I also saw.
Looks like they moved the different improvement plans underneath capital as opposed to having their separate warrants articles.
Right,
So.
Or pulling them off.
Well,
right,
yeah.
and that is because, that is because I believe, I'll let them speak for themselves when they want to talk about it, but I believe that is because in the absence of available funds, they believe that the $6 million we have in the capital expenditure fund should be used to proceed with their priorities there, which I personally don't agree with, right? I mean, I'm not opposed to the studies, but what's needed is, we've asked them repeatedly, prioritize which ones, they presented us with a debt plan that made it clear that all of these things could not happen at once.
Including the high school.
Including the high school, right? So.
Not even at once, but like even within a scope of 10 to 20 years almost.
I wouldn't say 10 to 20, but yes, within the scope of the high school. Right? So to me, I still haven't seen a prioritization of, okay, these are each member of the select board has their priority clearly based on what they're asking for. And I don't think they've discussed which of those three is the top priority, right? It's their prerogative to decide that, but I'm not liking. I also disagree with the shift to capital. That's kind of, again, it's a. While it's not illegal in any way or anything like that, I'm not implying they're doing anything improper. I just don't like the idea, right? You have a warrant article that says we want to spend money on this study, and now you're tucking away in capital because the finances got tight, so you found another pool of money to try to tap it from. That's I don't like that mentality, right? Having said that, I also wanted to point out, because somebody else, I think Vin asked me about this, right? Everybody's pointing to that $6 million in the capital expenditure fund, but keep in mind that the reason we built it up, there were two primary reasons. One was we have an already approved water treatment plant, and we were looking to say, if we have excess free cash, we can use some of that extra, put that in capital and use that to offset the borrowing we might need for the water treatment plant, which, by the way, in my mind is the number one priority, right? Get the water to stop being brown. Okay.
And Ken, what does it mean if we don't borrow for the water treatment plant? What is the effect on the taxpayer?
I'd have to get the exact amount. We already have.
It means lower taxes, right? I mean,
yes. It means
no tax increase.
Right, and
then savings to the taxpayer.
Absolutely. To every dollar, just like the traffic lights, right? The town authorized a borrowing for that by us, meaning the town, at our recommendation, voting to pay that out of the money we had accumulated for that. It avoided the need for the town to raise anybody's taxes to pay for the traffic lights.
I just want to translate that so anyone watching or listening in would understand why that's sort of something that's appealing.
Right. Well. Okay. Just, you guys know this, but just for our audience, I'll just point out, right? When the town votes to authorize borrowing, what basically happens is the town borrows the money, and all the money needed to pay that loan, pay that bond that the town has taken out, is raised through an addition to your taxes. Okay. So, for example, when we have the schools, and I talked about this at the last town meeting, right? On December 1 of last year, we made the final payment on a bond we had to pay for the Placentino, I think it was Placentino and Miller schools, the work that was done in the late 90s, right? For the last 20 years, everybody's tax bill has included a piece of tax, so to speak, that represents their share of that bond payment. When the bond was paid off in December of 2019, the ability for the town to raise money to cover that cost goes away. In other words, it's not money that we had sitting around that we allocated for the bond. We raised the money through a tax increase to pay for the bond. When the bond is paid off, the money automatically goes away, and you see that as a decrease in the tax rate, right? So already going into FY21, regardless of what happens in the economy, there will be a savings to everybody relative to what they were paying in FY20, simply because the bond for those schools was paid off. So when we authorize the borrowing for things like the water treatment plant, which we have not taken the bond for yet, okay? So we authorized, the town voted to say, we will borrow more money to pay for the treatment plant, okay? We haven't gotten to the point where we need to borrow the money yet. And every dollar we put towards that treatment plant that we have is $1 less that goes into that loan, which means it's lowering the amount of additional tax we need to get to pay for the loan. So in theory, if we had $8 million in capital and we said we're going to pay the $8 million for the treatment plant out of capital, then nobody sees a tax increase associated with that. Obviously, we don't have that much, but to the extent that we can put some of that money to that bond, it's less money that people will see on their tax bills. And that's the that's how it works. Just for, you know, I know the committee knows this, but just for anybody who's listening. So Mr. Sparrow, go ahead.
I just want to point out, I mean, I understand, you know, there's a lot of things in this this warrant, but I've been to the last few select board meetings and they haven't discussed anything in here. So I think, you know, so I think there's certainly, you know, some things that, you know, we might say, you know, why is this here? Why is that here? I think there's going to be a lot of changes to the warrant. And you know, but they haven't taken it up in formal session that I've seen. So I think there's, I just say, like, you know, we could certainly have like general conversation, but I think we could pump the brakes because I think there's going to be quite a few things from their end that's going to be taken off of this warrant.
Okay. Yeah, well, that was the other thing I wanted to say, right? I wasn't sure what they had done. That's why I was kind of surprised when I saw it sent out. I was like, it looks like they haven't. To my knowledge, they hadn't taken it up yet. So I agree.
I haven't seen anything. Haven't seen them take any of it up yet. It's been on the agenda, but they haven't really made any of these, made any comments or taken any votes about any of the articles that I've seen.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Murphy.
Yes, can you remind me how much the water treatment plant is going to be?
The authorization was 8.2 million.
Okay.
We have already paid about 600,000 for the, you know, obviously the 8.2 million covers the, you know, the engineering drawings, site plan, all that stuff.
Yep.
Some of that early work we've already paid for out of I don't want to say capital, but I think that was partly paid out of water retained earnings, but we have not needed to borrow because we've been paying the costs so far with monies that we had.
And when do we think we're going to actually start fixing that plant so we get rid of some of the brown water?
The work is supposed to be starting real soon. I don't want to say with certainty because I haven't talked to Sean about it recently, but the first year was doing all the engineering drawings and the preliminary site work. And I know that the work was planned to start this year and complete sometime. I think it's supposed to be online in 21, calendar 21 or FY 21. I'm not sure. So,
thank you.
Okay, Ms. Nersessian.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that Vin and I reached out to Park and Rec, and they have a meeting on May 20th, I think, with their board. So we'll know more on the capital and also their budget at that point. So they're delayed a little bit just because they haven't met as a board, you know, their board hasn't met yet with them. So, okay. Plus they haven't heard yet on summer programming and all that. I think that's supposed to come in mid-May. Yeah, and that's the one thing I thought about after we sent the memo and such was that there is, you know, the state directive on the open meeting law was if you don't have to meet, don't meet. So I know that a lot of the boards are meeting much less frequently now because their only meeting is necessary to try to minimize the number of virtual meetings they have. There was a specific exception for boards like ours and the select board that have, you know, more ongoing activities that we have to cover. So, okay. So I see there was a question from the public. So go ahead and you can ask the question if you'd like. Just unmute first. Oh, or do you want to just, because I was going to say, there you go. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize it. You want to be asking?
Just please do me a favor and state your name and address just for the record.
I'm not a town resident. Does that matter?
Not really, but you can ask. But I mean, as I said, you still have to say your name and address. I still identify myself.
Yeah, Andrew Powell from the American Federation of Teachers. I work with the teachers union in town. Mm-hmm. Question to the FinCom, because again, I'm sort of late to the process in your budget development guidelines. has FinCom taken a position as to whether you're going to recommend to continue to fund the same amount of money that you've put into the OPEB liability in the previous fiscal years for FY21, despite the fact that GASB does not require funding? And second, the town's progression towards the overall funding of this liability is fairly advanced compared to many other municipalities. And third, the town's bond rating, because of that funding in the OPEB liability status so far, is not yet impacted.
Okay, I can answer that question.
Thank you.
It's got the multiple parts, okay? First of all, the fact that GASB doesn't require it doesn't impact us at all because the liability is there, whether GASB says we have to fund it or not. As far as the town being well-funded, the town's liability has actually increased relative to our last valuation, partly because of employment growth in the town employee base. So as a result of that, yes, we are putting away money, and yes, we are ahead of our peers, but that is very poor public policy to say that we should be bad just because our neighbors are bad. Holliston has worked very hard to fund that. And the third thing is it has nothing to do with the bond rating. It has more to do with the fact that these are benefits that have already been earned. And it would be irresponsible of us to not continue to fund them. As far as whether we've taken a formal position, we have not yet voted anything relative to FY21. So that's not formally, we haven't formally taken action on that money yet. So, Mr. Alfred.
Yeah, so I would just like to say that, well, first of all, I've taken no options off the table entirely. The scenarios are too fluid and there are too many different things that are happening right now to eliminate an option as a potential. However, touching the OPEB set aside would be the absolute lowest on my list of things that I would be willing to touch. And with sort of capital being, I think, the first cut, and then into stabilization, and then, you know, some other things, and maybe some other few more things, and then we can maybe look at OPEB. But also, you know, touching OPEB as a last resort would only be to save jobs, and would absolutely in no way be to pay for expansion of services, including expansion of or increases in salaries. We're just not in a I mean, just to put yourself in a position where you're hurting the town's ability to fund its future liabilities, to pay for pay increases and for anyone in town is just something that I don't view as to be, you know, fiscally prudent. That said, it's also very important to recognize, and for everyone to recognize, that given that the schools have the preponderance of the employees in town, OPEB is predominantly to the benefit of those employees. So I view it as a total compensation package, and that's part of it.
Okay, Mr. Sparrow.
To piggyback a little bit on what Dan said, I do agree that, we should not be touching OPEB. I mean, that's our policy, and we haven't changed our policy document, but nothing should be taken off the table. However, it's important that, we do continue to fund our liabilities, and we explore options as we, look at what the budget needs to look like to make sure that we can maintain services wherever possible with the intention of restoring things like OPEB. But I think, it's important that we keep in mind that these liabilities exist and that we continue to do everything we can to fund towards them. And we've certainly seen towns, I mean, it's a little extreme, but we've seen towns default because of some of these liabilities. And the last thing we want to do is put ourselves down that path because we make bad decisions and future FinComs don't continue with the process. So that's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Maxwell, the Clarence Thomas of this group tonight.
I don't mean to be the Clarence Thomas of the group. I just wanted to say I fully agree with Mr. Alfred and Mr. Sparrow. These are benefits earned. We need to fund them. And the only position I would be in, the only situation I would be in where I would be willing to look at OPEB funding would be to preserve jobs. So thank you.
Okay. Mr. Murphy?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate exactly what Tim just said, that, yeah, the only reason we look at OPEB is to save a job. I don't think it's worth, we are trying to pay down this liability. It should have been something that was pay as you go instead of what all this accounting because of GASB burying their heads in the sand. And just as an edification for yourself, Mr. Powell, it's GASB doesn't care how we pay it. They just want us to disclose the liabilities. And prior years, government accounting was based on cash. And now it's coming home to roost, looking at all our liabilities, including our county debt, the liability for the retirement for the county people. One of the things the bond raters suggested is we start doing something with that. I'm a little hesitant because I don't think I want to be the only town out there paying for retirement at this point when the whole thing is probably going to go bust. But we do have an obligation to the people, the employees, former employees and the current employees of the town to fund it for the OPEB. And that includes a lot of people who are your members, I'm guessing, for teachers, because as Ken pointed out, the majority of the people who are in this town are teachers and who are receiving those benefits are former teachers. So we have an obligation. We made this promise. And I think it's our responsibility, something that wasn't done in prior generations, to fund this and make sure it's whole. And as Tim, Ken, and everybody else mentioned, it'll be the last thing on our plate to touch it. So.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that in a sense, it's non-discretionary, right? And what I always don't like about the argument that other towns don't do it as well as we do is that the bill comes due, right? Whether you like it or not, right? These are benefits that have already been earned and they're owed. And, do we want to be, or, I think as an employer, you don't want to put yourself, it would be a disservice to our employees to say, we promised you this benefit, and then when you come time to use it, we say, oh, sorry, the money's not there. I mean, it's the same thing, the discussion you see at the federal level about Social Security, where people are paying into a system their whole careers, and then you have, a government, Congress may be looking at saying, okay, well, you've paid into it, but now, there's no money for you. It's like, that's, I think as a responsible employer, we have an obligation to continue the funding unless absolutely necessary. So.
If I could just say.
Yep, go ahead, Michelle. Is she like Max Headroom?
I grew up in a union. I grew up in a union house, and my father, after he was retired, his union pension and benefits, I won't go into the whole story, but it went bankrupt, and he lost his pension and he lost his benefits. And if I have anything to do with it, it's not going to happen on my watch to town employees. And that includes the teachers. And OPEB, rating OPEB is on the very bottom of my list. I feel responsibility to town employees, and that includes the teachers. And it's not going to happen on my watch. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, so I think we've answered the question sufficiently. We can move on. So back to the warrant. Is there anything else that anybody wants to comment on? We just want to wait and see. Oh, Sue? You want to say something?
Actually, I just had a question. So last week, I think that you had mentioned that you, Michelle, and Dan were meeting with the schools after they had a chance to meet, but I didn't see any. I didn't see any modifications. I mainly was looking at capital, but have they done a revised budget, or what's the expectation in terms of timing for the schools?
They are working on one. We'll get an update on that tomorrow, right? When we talked to them last week, it was predominantly, remember that, that as I said last week, right? The school closure, we talked to them a lot about the scenario, to reference what we said earlier. We talked to them a lot about the 1/12 budget, what happens during the summer, what happens in the fall. As I said, they're doing their scenario planning right now, so they don't have a budget yet. And also they didn't meet last week. So even if, we met with them as liaisons, but they didn't have a school committee meeting last week. So their meeting is this Thursday. So if there's any discussion to be had, it'll be this Thursday.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the timing of that, so I figured I would ask.
So, okay. So any other comments on the warrant? As I said, I guess we'll just wait, see. We don't need to take any action on the draft we got because it still hasn't been discussed by the select board. So we'll let them have at it. Yes, Mr. Alfred.
I don't want to get into a deep discussion about this today unless we planned on it, but obviously the the line item transfers are not on the warrant. And we saw some email flow about that. I didn't know if you want to talk about that today.
We'll keep
it's already 9 o'clock, so I'm not really sort of.
Yeah, well, I'll give you the quick summary, right? The line items you're talking about are not the line items that you're referring to. They're two different things, right? Under our superpowers, right? We get the line item transfers every year to close out.
No, I get the difference, but I think if I were to view how we would deal with these salary adjustments properly, in my opinion, they would be on the warrant as line item transfers, not coming to us as for our superpowers, regardless of whether you can get around it other,
Right.
That's what I meant, is that they're not on there, obviously.
Right, they're not on the warrant, and they're not going to be coming to us as line item transfers because town council has given the town the opinion that the comments that were made. Now, I'll render my two cent personal opinion on this, but when I got up at town meeting last May, I made the comment that we were putting aside the $75,000 for the select board to look at and review, basically do a review of the managerial salaries, right? That has been used as the means to get the DOR to say, okay, well, the town really knew what they were voting for. Now, I seriously don't agree with that. And I expressed that opinion to our town council. Because while I did say correctly that we had put aside this money to look at that, there was no plan. And I made that clear when I said that they hadn't figured out what they were doing, so we're putting it aside till they figure out what they're doing, right? So to me, I don't consider that notification, right? If I say to somebody, we're going to put away some money to do 10 things, and you say, okay, well, we're formulating a plan for what those 10 things are. That means the town, by saying, okay, we agree, you're going to go off and look at this, and here's the money to do it, that you agree with all the 10 items that I spent it on, right? Ultimately, town meeting has to approve it. Now, I will say that, as I said before, regardless of what happens with FY20, it's in the omnibus, it has to be in the salary lines for FY21. It's a discussion that will have to happen at whatever town meeting we have, okay? But personally, you've heard me say this before, I really do not like loopholes. And I really do not like, any attempt to, again, I'm not implying illegality or impropriety, but I'm just sitting there saying, look, stand behind the decisions you make. I go up to town meeting every year and I present what we decided, and I give them the reason for why we decided what we did. And it's up to the town to decide whether they want to take our recommendations or not. But I'm not going to try to say to the town, we took action X, but I'm going to try to do my best to, bury it. I'll say, this is why we did what we did. And that's where I look at this matter more of along that line of, I wish it were more of a public discussion, because all these measures, the withdrawal of the article in October, this action by town council to say that it doesn't need to be a line item transfer, those are all, in my mind, just my opinion only, attempts to not discuss the issue with the town. It has to happen at our next town meeting, but why do you need to do, why can't you be transparent about what was happening?
It's transparency in government, and it's not a part of the plan, apparently, of this.
But when you're not transparent on one thing, what else are you not being transparent on? It really lays a lot of question around that. And I frankly found that email very disturbing.
Yeah, but ultimately it's up to the town to decide, right? They have to vote for whoever they vote for. They can vote us out of office. They can vote anybody out, right? I think that to me is
right now. There's no elections to have.
That's right. Well, Ben's gonna, but anyway. So yes, I was not happy about that either. But that's a whole other thing. Yes, Mr. Sparrow.
I understand. I mean, I think we've gone around and around and around, all of us, on this for quite many times. And I think we'll have our chance to have the conversation about it at town meeting. I think the bigger, to me, there's sort of two issues here. I mean, first we can have a conversation about transparency and whether or not they're being transparent. But I think the other issue is that we have to make sure that financially that these transfers take place in FY20, because there are budgets that are going to run out of money in May. So there needs to be a solution of some kind to make sure that we're not furloughing department heads because there's not enough money to pay their salary. And I recognize that this is, a solution that's sort of seems unorthodox, and it's, we can have a conversation about I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. It's uncharted territory for me. But at the same time, there needs to be a solution. It needs to be soon. And, certainly I've heard people say things like, we're not going to vote for it. We're not, and we have to get it done because as financial stewards, we have to make sure that the finances are taken care of and that we're not creating accounting holes. And, the next time we have a bond rating, if we want to do it next year, they'll say, why are there gaps in the financing and in accounting because there weren't transfers done, or there wasn't solutions for these.
At the same time, just because the select board makes a mess does not mean we need to come in and clean it up.
We have a financial responsibility for stewardship to make sure. Look, there's a process problem and there's a financial problem. We have to make sure that the finances are taken care of. And the finances, we need to make sure that we're not leaving gaps. They found a solution, good or bad or whatever. But the fact is there needs to be something done to make sure that we're not laying off department heads.
Correct, but I will say this, right? The solution they found, in my mind, is a loophole to avoid having a public discussion about it. That's the issue, right? And we don't. I agree with you. We've talked about this ad nauseum, so we don't need to spend more time on it. But the financial solution would have been to have the open discussion about it and say, this is what we decided and this is what we did, right? But anyway, we'll move on.
Ken, I understand we don't need to have a discussion, keep having the discussion on it, except that it keeps coming up and it's not us that keeps bringing it up, right? It's another loophole here that's being done to try to get around something that we've said multiple times needs to be presented to the town.
And by the way, the loopholes that have been found keep getting decided later on that in fact those weren't really loopholes and they couldn't really do it that way anyway. So
So okay, so Mr. Murphy, you were going to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that yes, I thoroughly agree they're going and trying to circumvent the whole situation, but at the point, does it behoove us to have an issue at this point, especially if we bring this up at town meeting, in light of the fact that we're going to have draconian issues because we're going to have to cut the budget tremendously and hopefully not cut staff? I don't think it behooves the committee to make a deal. I think we've stated our issues. We're concerned about the situation. We don't like the way it was done. I just personally don't think it would make us look good, us being the committee, if we waited until town meeting because they're going to do this. They're already going to say, Sharon, pay the money. So we're out of the loop. I think we should just let sleeping dogs lie at this point. Tell them we're very unhappy with the situation. What's the other alternative?
No, I think that the key, just to be clear from my perspective, Ben, it's not like I'm planning on going to town meeting and making it a 3-hour debate, but I do think it is very important the town understands the process that was used and how it got to that point, right? Because I think that's important. I would want to know if my elected officials were taking actions and then we're looking to lawyers to find them ways out of dealing with it in the normal course of business, which is really what they're doing here, right?
Yep.
I mean, if that's the issue to me at this point, right? Is that, again, it's you made a decision, present it to the town, explain why you made the decision. If people disagree with you, if you go to town meeting and we say, here's our recommended budget, anybody can stand up and say, we disagree with that budget, right? It doesn't mean that we're going to vote for or against it. You have to debate. But to basically continually look for ways to avoid the debate is what the issue is here. That they avoided it in October, and now they're avoiding it now because the debate would have to happen in our meeting to discuss the line item transfers. So to your point, I agree. And the times we're in, we're not, and just to be clear, this is not an us versus them thing. It's not like I hate the select board. I mean, they're all, people that I talk to on a routine basis. But in this particular instance, the process they took should raise a lot of red flags. And it's important for the town to know that process occurred and not to just say, okay, well, now it's done, so let's just forget about it, right? Someone has to alert the town and say, you may be okay with this, but you should at least know that this is what happened. So Yeah, I'll get to you in a second, Ben, but Michelle was first.
My problem with the whole issue is that I think town council, instead of being charged with talk to DOR, present the information, I felt like he was charged with present it in this way to support what I don't know, which I guess isn't we're supposed to zealously represent our clients. And I think in this case, his client was the select board.
Not the town.
What?
Not the town.
Not town meeting, or not the town, it was the select
town
board.
council, not the select board council.
Right. And I think that's my issue.
Yeah. Okay, so Ben, you want to say something? Then we'll let this go because I don't want to go on and on.
The last thing I say about it, two things. First of all, there was supposed to be a town meeting tonight when we would have talked about it.
Exactly.
Last night, excuse me. And then the second thing is go to the select board meeting and people and bring it up. And they do talk about it in their select board meeting. And, there might not be the level of transparency that people want to see, but I have seen them discuss it. I mean, look, I don't know the behind the scenes stuff, so I can't speak to it. But what I am going to say is that I have seen it spoken and discussed at the select board meetings, and there's not objections brought at that time. So that's all I'm going to say, and I hope we can move on. Thanks.
Okay, so let's see. We've beaten this to horse meat, so let's move on. So okay, anybody have anything else for this evening? Let me just double check my little list here, make sure I covered everything.
Didn't you want to approve the minutes?
Yeah.
Oh yes, the minutes. See, that's why I wanted to go back and check my list. So
We used to approve them en masse.
No.
yeah, we can. It's March 3rd, March 12th, and March 17th were the three. So did everybody get a chance to look those over?
Did I have a couple ticky-tacky things on a couple of them?
Okay, tell me what the corrections are. You can send them to me later, but I want you to disclose them in the public meeting so when we vote, everybody knows.
March 3rd, it's referenced MIAA, and I don't believe that's correct about Chris working with the MIAA. MIAA is the Mass Institute.
I know, but I think there's the insurers also like MIA or M.
Oh.
So Chris can chime in if he wants to, but isn't MIA also the insurer? Or is it MAII or something like that? Something very similar, if it's not the same.
Because I Googled it and that's what I got was the Mass.
Yes, that's what I thought. That's what I thought for a long time, but it's something like
okay.
It's MIIA. That's what it is.
See if Chris can answer.
So I'll change it to MIIA.
Also, I think it should be town's auditor as opposed to town auditor.
Okay, hold on. We're talking March 3rd.
Yeah, I'm going. I wasn't there, so.
Yeah, so
but under treasurer's office, no, I'm looking at ticky tacky.
I know, I'm just kidding.
Town's auditor, it should be plural or possessive, as opposed to town auditor. Second paragraph.
Okay.
Third sentence.
Okay. Yeah, I see it. Okay, I'll correct that.
Okay. Other than that, that was it.
Okay. Anybody else have any other corrections? I made all of yours already, Sue.
I don't have a correction. I just like to have the format a little bit with headings.
I can change it.
Yeah, if you want,
I'll modify it back to the way normally we do it, so that's not a problem.
Okay, yeah, because as I said, they sent me, our new tag team, they sent it to me, and I said, as long as you got attendees, times, things, you're good. And
right,
so,
that's why I didn't respond.
Now, Vin, would you like me to have them? I can just tell them, send them directly to you now.
Yeah, I don't mind. Okay. I'll go through it. It's just writing the minutes myself.
Yes, no, that's fine. That's why we're being productive.
That's why you voted me when I went to the restroom. That's what I was afraid of just now.
That's right. Next year he's going to be wearing Depends at our meetings just to make sure he doesn't get voted clerk again. Right. So.
Okay.
Okay. So are we okay? Everybody okay with then March 3rd, March 12th, and March 17th?
Well, let's approve March 3rd, and then we'll jump to 12 and.
Okay.
A couple of things on both of them.
So I'll take a motion to approve March 3rd.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I second. Vin Murphy.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's just do that for the record because they're going to watch the video. So make sure right. Okay, any further discussion on the minutes for March 3rd? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote. It's got to be a roll call. So Ms. Zemer,
Aye.
Mr. Alfred, Mr. Sparrow,
Aye.
Mr. Maxwell,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
I have to abstain.
okay, and Ms. Nersessian?
Yep.
Okay, and I vote aye, so that one's approved. Okay, so now March 12th. You had more corrections, Vin, or is it something?
12th. I didn't have anything on that one.
Okay, anybody have anything on the 12th? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion for the 12th.
So moved.
Okay, so Ben, you gonna second that one instead?
Sure, I'll second it.
Okay. Okay, any further debate on that? Okay, proceed to roll call vote. Ms. Zemer,
Aye.
Mr. Alfred,
Aye.
Mr. Sparrow,
Aye.
Mr. Maxwell,
I abstain.
okay, Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Ms. Nersessian,
I'm abstaining as well.
okay, that carries. Okay, now March 17th.
Okay.
Oh, and I vote aye, by the way, on the last one, just for the record. It's good.
What did I say? Oh, the thing at the bottom, the way you did the vote, I think we should put something, requested a roll call vote, passed unanimously. Just under the end. Finance committee member
Yeah,
Dan made a motion.
Okay. Okay, and so you're the very last sentence you're talking about?
Yeah, I would suggest requested a roll call vote, which passed, just so it's, we are, it shows you actually pulled the roll call as opposed to.
Oh, actually, that's a good question. You know what I think we'll do with all these virtual meetings is I added at the top, like at the top, I said it was convened under virus, right? We can put a thing at the top that says all votes noted in the minutes are roll call votes.
Okay.
Right? Because if there's 7-0, you obviously know who voted right.
Yep.
You can, so maybe we'll do that. We'll do that. So if that's the case, then we can, I'll take a motion to approve those as amended, as just discussed.
Motion to approve the minutes of March 17th as amended.
Second.
Okay. Again, we go to the roll call. If there's no further debate, Ms. Zemer,
Aye.
Mr. Alfred,
Aye.
Mr. Sparrow,
Aye.
Mr. Maxwell,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Ms. Nersessian,
Yes.
and I vote aye for that. So that means we have those three sets of minutes are all taken care of. So Vin, are you going to make that last change to the 17th? I sent out updated versions.
I don't know what you want to do regarding the wording you want at the top.
Okay, I'll send you the wording
Okay.
then. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll tell the two people working on it, I'll tell them to send the drafts to you from now on.
Perfect.
Okay. Is there anything else we need to attend to this evening? Okay. If not, then I will entertain the motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. And second, do I have a second for that?
Second.
Second.
Okay. That is not subject to debate. So we'll proceed to a roll call vote. Ms. Zemer,
Aye.
Mr. Alfred,
Aye.
Mr. Sparrow,
Aye.
Mr. Maxwell,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
and Ms. Nersessian.
Aye.
And I vote aye. That concludes the Tuesday, May 5th meeting of the Finance Committee. Thank you for joining us this evening. As you know, for the foreseeable future, we will be meeting virtually, so you feel free to join us again next Tuesday. Right now, unless things change, we'll be meeting next Tuesday, May 12th. Same method, and we'll see you then. But for tonight, we're done. So thank you and good night.
Thank you.